You're standing at the mailbox on a Tuesday morning, and there it is. The envelope from Social Security, the one you've been half expecting and half avoiding for weeks. You carry it inside, set it on the kitchen table next to your coffee, and just look at it for a minute before you open it. 62. That's the number that's been sitting in the back of your mind for months now. Not because you want to stop working, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but because 62 is the first day Social Security will actually let you claim. And there's a pull to it. A real one. The idea that you could start that check coming in now, instead of waiting years for a someday that never quite feels guaranteed. Here's the thing almost nobody tells you before you open that envelope. This is one of the only major decisions in your entire retirement that you cannot take back. Think about that for a second. You can change your mind about where you live. You can adjust how much you spend. You can go back to work part-time if the money's tight. Almost every financial choice in retirement bends a little. This one doesn't. Once you claim, that percentage is locked in for the rest of your life. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what claiming at 62 actually costs you, why the popular break-even age math you've probably heard about is kind of misleading, and, maybe more importantly, how to know if claiming early is actually the smart move for your specific situation. Because sometimes it is. This isn't a scare video telling you never to claim early. It's the conversation nobody sits down and has with you before you make the call. Let's start with Frank. Frank's not a real person, but if you've spent any time in a retirement community, you've met him. Frank worked as a mechanic for 31 years, good with his hands, terrible with paperwork, which he'd be the first to admit. When he turned 62, his knees were aching, his back had that permanent stiffness that mechanics get. And honestly, he was just tired. The idea of a check showing up every month starting now felt like relief. So he claimed. Nobody warned him what that number would look like 10 years later. Down the street, there's Carol. Carol worked in a school office. She was nervous about money too. Everybody is. But her sister, who'd retired a few years earlier, told her something simple. Just call and ask what the difference actually is before you decide. So Carol did. She found out that waiting from 62 to 67 meant her check would be about 30% higher, permanently, for the rest of her life. She gritted her teeth, worked a little longer than she'd planned, and waited. 10 years later, Frank and Carol are having coffee together sometimes like neighbors do. And the gap between their monthly checks is real. Not because Carol was smarter. Not because Frank made a bad decision. He made the decision that felt right with the information he had. The only real difference is that Carol knew a rule Frank didn't. That's the whole video, honestly. It's not about being good or bad with money. It's about knowing this one rule before you're standing at that mailbox. So here's the rule. In plain language, Social Security calls 67 your full retirement age if you were born in 1960 or later. It might be 66 in a few months if you're a bit older than that. That's the age they consider the baseline. If you claim at 62, the earliest possible date, your check gets permanently reduced, typically somewhere around 25 to 30% lower than what you'd get at full retirement age. Not temporarily lower, permanently, for the rest of your life, and depending on your situation, potentially affecting what a surviving spouse could receive too. Now here's where it gets interesting, and where most of the online calculators kind of miss the point. You've probably heard people talk about a break-even age, the idea that if you live past a certain age, waiting was worth it, and if you don't, claiming early was worth it. That math isn't wrong exactly, but it's incomplete, and I want to explain why, because this misunderstanding is what trips up more retirees than almost anything else. Think of it like planting two trees on the same day. One tree, you decide to let grow for a few more years before you start picking fruit from it every season. The other tree, you start picking from right away, but because you started early, it never grows as large. Every single season for the rest of that tree's life, it just produces less. The break-even calculators only ask, when do the total apples add up to be equal? But they don't factor in something important. Your Social Security check also gets a cost of living adjustment almost every year, and that adjustment is a percentage. A percentage increase on a bigger check is a bigger dollar amount than the same percentage increase on a smaller one. So the gap between Frank's check and Carol's check doesn't just stay the same over the years. It tends to widen. I want to pause here and say something important, because I don't want you walking away from this feeling like you made a mistake if you've already claimed, or like you're behind if you haven't figured this out yet. You're not behind. Almost nobody explains this clearly, and Social Security's own materials, honestly, aren't written for kitchen table conversations. If this is the first time you're hearing it explained this way, that's not on you. That's the system. And if you're listening to this and you already claimed it 62 years ago without knowing any of this, take a breath. You didn't fail at anything. You made the best decision you could with the information you had in front of you, which is all any of us can ever do. This isn't a video about looking backward with regret. It's about making sure the decisions still ahead of you, the withdrawal order, the Medicare choices, the conversations with your spouse, get made with this same clarity. And here's something else worth knowing, because this isn't a one-size-fits-all decision, and anyone telling you it isn't giving you the full picture. There are real situations where claiming early is genuinely the right call. If you have a health condition that makes a longer life expectancy less likely, waiting doesn't necessarily make sense. The math is built around averages, and averages don't apply to every individual. If you desperately need the income now and the alternative is running through savings you can't replace, an early claim can be the responsible choice, not the reckless one. And if you're the higher earner in a marriage, your decision about when to claim can actually affect what your spouse receives as a survivor benefit someday, which is a whole layer most people never even think to ask about. Take Ruth, for example. Ruth had a heart condition that ran in her family, and her doctor had been honest with her about what that might mean for her long-term outlook. When Ruth sat down and ran her own numbers, she didn't agonize over the decision the way you might expect. She claimed at 62, and she doesn't regret it. Not for one day. For Ruth, the math of, will I live long enough for waiting to pay off, pointed clearly in the other direction, and she made her decision with clear eyes instead of guilt. That's the whole point of understanding the rule. It's not about always waiting. It's about never guessing. Stay with me, because I want to show you the one exception that changes this conversation for a lot of married couples, and it's something almost nobody brings up. If you're married, and you're the spouse with the higher lifetime earnings, your claiming age doesn't just affect your own check. It sets the floor for what your spouse could receive as a survivor benefit if you pass away first. That means the decision isn't really just about you. It's about protecting the person sitting across the table from you at dinner every night too. A lot of couples make this decision individually, each spouse just thinking about their own number, when really it deserves one conversation, together, looking at both sides. So what do you actually do with all this? Let's make it simple, because I promised you practical steps, not just information to worry about. First, before you claim anything, call the Social Security Administration directly or set up an account at their website and ask them to show you your actual numbers at 62, at your full retirement age, and at 70. Not an estimate from a random article. Your real numbers, based on your real earnings record. That one phone call changes this from an abstract idea into a decision you can actually see clearly. Second, if you're married, have this conversation together, out loud, specifically about what happens to the survivor benefit under a few different scenarios. This isn't romantic dinner conversation, I know, but it's one of those 5-minute talks that can protect someone you love for decades. Third, be honest with yourself about health and family history. This isn't about being morbid, it's just information, the same way you'd factor in anything else that affects a long-term financial decision. And fourth, if the math still feels confusing, a fee-only financial advisor, someone who isn't earning a commission off whatever you decide, can run these numbers with you in about 20 minutes. It's often worth that conversation before a decision you can't undo. One more thing, and it's a small one, but it matters. Write your decision down, along with the reasons behind it, and keep it somewhere with your other retirement paperwork. Not because anyone's going to quiz you on it, but because 5 or 10 years from now, if you ever wonder whether you made the right call, you'll have your own reasoning in your own words, from the version of you who actually did the homework. That's worth more than a stranger's opinion on the internet. Here's what I want you to walk away with. This isn't about Frank being wrong and Carol being right. Frank made a completely reasonable decision with what he knew at the time, and there's real dignity in that. The whole point of a video like this isn't to make you feel behind. It's to make sure that whichever path you choose, you're choosing it with your eyes open, not just because a date on a calendar happened to arrive. You've already done something most people never do. You've sat with this decision long enough to actually understand it, instead of just opening that envelope and guessing. That puts you ahead, not behind. Whatever age you decide is right for you, 62, 67, 70, or somewhere in between, make it a decision, not a default. That's the whole difference. And if this helped make things a little clearer, stick around, because there's a lot more of retirement that deserves this same kind of honest, kitchen table explanation, starting with what actually happens to that Social Security number the day your spouse passes away, which we'll get into soon.